Pardon? Good evening, everyone. My name's Stephanie. I'm here with the Bookshelf and Cormorant Books. Excited to welcome Carolyn Huizinga Mills in her launch of The Good Son, and in conversation this evening with Kaylee Platts. Just to let everyone know a little bit about the format of the evening, we will be doing a kind of question and answer that has been pre-arranged with Kaylee and Carolyn, but we certainly want lots of audience participation. So if you do would like to hear a little more about any particular thing or have some questions for Carolyn about her process, please contact us over the chat, and Kaylee will do her best to try to grab a few of those questions at the end of the original talk. So but firstly, I'd like to introduce Mark Cote, who is the publisher of Cormorant Books. In fact, he's been doing this for 20 years. He's had the pleasure over that time of working with several Canadian authors and poets of great renown. And he's also enjoyed lots of other roles in this industry, including working as a bookstore clerk, working as a reviewer. He's managed the Stoddart Publishing House. He also has had the honor of working on the Canadian Council for Arts and the Literary Press Group, which are both very prestigious areas of our particular line of work. Over the past 2 decades, Cormorant Books has had the distinction of being nominated 8 times for the Canadian Booksellers Association Award, and it has won 3 times. Mark has won the Libris for Editor of the Year twice. So please join me in welcoming Mark Cote. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. And this is the point in a book launch where I get to stand in a wonderful bookstore and point to it, to the books on the shelves and the staff, and thank them for helping us out in our book launch. And I can talk about the importance of bookstores. Of course, now we're doing this all virtually, but I hope all of you listening and participating have been able to visit the bookshelf and buy books there. It is an institution in Guelph, and it is a 2nd generation bookstore. They're on their 2nd generation of owners within the same family, and it is one of the truly great bookstores of our country. Not only can students at local colleges and the university get their textbooks at the bookshelf, but you can attend a theater and a movie theater, and you can go to a restaurant and get a drink. How many bookstores have those options? But at core, the bookshelf is a true straight up bookstore. And we in the publishing industry are grateful to the Manette family for their dedication to this industry and the really great work they do. Now, I also get to introduce our author of the moment, Carolyn, who was sent to me by way of Marilyn Simons. And Marilyn asked me to look at her Carolyn's novel, and I did, and I called Carolyn and we chatted for a few minutes, and I said something and she said, "Oh, I have another novel too." So I said, "Send that along." And as any good author has ever been stymied by a good editor, I called her back after I read the 2nd book and said, "Your 2nd book is going to become your 1st novel." And that's the novel we're here to launch tonight, The Good Son. Prior to becoming an author at Cormorant, Carolyn is a grade 7 teacher who loves to share her passion for reading and writing with her students. Now and again, she involves them in her own projects. I'm hoping some of them are watching tonight. In fact, one of her former students earned a mention in the acknowledgements section of The Good Son. Carolyn is also a children's book writer, and her first picture book, The Little Boy Who Lived Down the Drain, was chosen as a 2018 Blue Spruce Honor Book. And her 2nd picture book, Grandpa's Stars, is forthcoming. The Good Son is her first published novel, and she is hard at work on her other novel, which we will be publishing in 2 years' time. Kaylee Platts is a lifetime writer and an avid reader who is passionate about library advocacy. Thank you. Growing up and working in the Waterloo Region technology and academic sector, growing up and working in the Waterloo Region technology and academic sectors, she likes to examine the ways our complex world impacts everyday life. Well, that kind of comes out a little bit in Carolyn's novel. She holds a master's degree in anthropology and has defined her career around digital cultures, community building, and brand storytelling. Now I leave everything to Kaylee and to Carolyn. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for that warm welcome and introduction. And Carolyn, welcome. I am very excited to get to toast your debut novel. And I just wanted to welcome everyone who is attending. I know Stephanie mentioned, but please, if you have questions for Carolyn, throw them in the Q&A box, which you will see down in the bottom of your bar, and we will get to as many of them as we can. It is lovely to see so many people already filling the chat with congratulations and well wishes for Carolyn. So Carolyn, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm excited to be here.
Now, I feel like we should mention, Carolyn and I are just going to have a casual conversation. We are not going to give away any spoilers of the book because we know it has just launched, and many of you hopefully have copies, but may have not read them yet. So we will do our best to keep this spoiler free. I have to just give you a cheers. So in person, if we were launching this, we would be raising a celebratory glass of something. So I would like to raise a celebratory glass of, at Carolyn's request, a glass of white wine. So cheers, congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a sip because that's good luck. First question, because we're talking about The Good Son, which if you haven't seen, has a gorgeous cover. It's moody, it's dark. What is it about?
At its heart, I think it's about family relationships and how events from our past shape the people we become. And then I tried to add a layer of complication with the guilt that we might carry with us from childhood into our future. But specifically, it's about a girl named Zoe who witnesses an abduction as a child. And she withholds a piece of information from the police. And that secret, that knowledge that she didn't share the whole truth, haunts her as she's growing up. And then 30 years later, when the same case is reopened, all of the decisions she's made and that secret in particular threaten her happiness that she's managed to find.
Where did the idea for this come from?
It's hard to pin down exactly because I feel like there were so many different influences that just fed pieces of the storyline. I do remember when I thought of the original idea, though, I was on a fishing trip with Scott. It was our couples fishing trip, and I was in the boat and I started jotting ideas down in a notepad. And I was just thinking of, at that time, two brothers who were adults now and had a really fraught relationship. And then what had led to that and the perceptions of their childhood versions of themselves and how that would feed into their adult relationship. And so it sort of just built from there. And then over the course of working with Mark, it changed from two brothers to a brother and sister, which is the current story now.
And I love Zoe. She is so feisty and such a strong character. I read earlier versions of this book. Carolyn and I are in a writer's group together. So that's actually how we met. And it's so funny because now when I've read The Good Son, I can't even imagine her as anyone other than Zoe. How do you feel about, how do you feel about how Zoe came together? How do you see her as this bold person?
I fought Mark on it initially. I sent him an email saying, I really feel strongly that it should stay the way it is. And then he convinced me that no, it would be more compelling if it was a brother sister. So I started rewriting it just to see. I was like, okay, I'll try it. And within a few chapters, it took me a bit to find who Zoe was. And I had to lose the other character completely because the personality, it didn't work to just switch the character to become a girl. So I had to reinvent a new character. And once I found her, in particular, found her childhood self, I wrote Mark back saying, I think you're right. I really actually like this character. And I can't remember exactly what he replied, but it was something like, of course I was right. I've been doing this for a while. But so he was right. But I did have to really dig deep to find her. And then she just sort of evolved as I reworked the whole story through a new lens, through this new character's eyes. It changed childhood events, it changed current events, it changed the whole ending of the story. But she just sort of naturally unfolded through the scenes. Well, not naturally. I don't want to make it sound like it was too easy.
There was some blood, sweat, and tears in that.
Yes, I even had to watch Flashdance at one point.
Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about why you had to watch Flashdance? Because it's just a great story. And also, how have you never seen Flashdance before this?
I don't know, but I don't know that I ever want to see it again either. I was having a chat with Lana Button, who's another children's author, and I was
Lana, she's watching, I believe.
She's here. I saw her name pop up, and she said, "You should watch Flashdance because it has a female protagonist who's in a male-dominated career or role." And I really wanted my character to keep her existing job at the water treatment plant, and so she thought that that might help inspire me to just see Zoe in that environment and how that could become part of what was maybe compelling about her character and add to her feistiness and interest. So at Lana's suggestion, I watched Flashdance, and it was actually helpful, but I think it's better watched in the 80s.
Now, I'm still going with the theme of some of the elements of The Good Son. And something that you've brought up and talked a lot about in some of the interviews you've done leading up to the book launch has been about your experience growing up in a smaller town and how that really affected Zoe and her relationships. Can you tell me a little bit more about kind of how you grew up and how Zoe grew up?
I started out in Calgary, so not so small town, but then I moved to a very small town of Dunnville when I was 12, which compared to Calgary is even smaller. It's already a small town. It has about, I think, a population of 10,000 when I lived there. And so it was drastically different than what I was used to. But that's where I spent my formative years. And so there wasn't a lot to do in Dunnville. If you wanted to go to the movies, you had to leave town. So you really needed friends with cars. Everything was always out of town, which I think led to this idea that real life didn't happen where you were growing up. Real life happened somewhere else. And so I tried to infuse that into Zoe's character, where her brother, for sure, can't wait to get out of their town, which is called Dunford, which is not Dunnville. It's like Dunnville and Waterford. And I just tried to fuse some small town names together. But people who live in Dunnville might recognize certain aspects that will really remind them of Dunnville. And so I was trying to tie in that idea of wanting to get out of a small town, and that maybe if you didn't, that could be seen as you were stuck. And so Zoe's character, her brother leaves the small town and Zoe doesn't. And I wanted to build in, there can be different reasons for wanting to stay in your town. And so Zoe's good friend gives her a lot of flack for not leaving and not moving on to bigger, better things as he would look at it. Her brother gives her a hard time. But Zoe has her own reasons for staying in Dunford. And some of them aren't bad reasons to stay.
She's built a really good life for herself. A really good job, her own place.
Yeah. She's close with her mom. She helps take care of her mom. So she has lots of reasons that she could stay there, but she also has some darker reasons for not being able to leave, which I can't get into because we're not doing spoilers.
We can't get into that. That's the only thing about launching a mystery, is that you can't get too involved in the plot without giving away. But one of my questions I did have was about the two timelines. So when you read The Good Son, you flash between Zoe's childhood and formative years and what we'll call present day. And I'm always interested with writers about how those two timelines come together. Do you write them separately? Did you write them, one voice, one chapter at a time? How did you form those two very different timelines?
I wrote them simultaneously. So it was sort of whatever that scene needed. I would have the present scene. And then if I felt like I needed to go into the past now to build up to explain what had happened or to show how we got to that point, then I put them in. I don't know that that's the best way to do it. And I think then you run the risk of using the wrong voice, using the adult voice for the childhood scene or vice versa. So it's not the easiest way, but it was the most natural for me to just kind of keep building the story as it unfolded in my mind and as I saw what would happen next, and whether that was from her childhood or a present day moment.
And okay, we aren't going to give away the ending for obvious reasons. But for anyone who's read the ending, you do something that I really love, and I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about your choice for doing this. You end the novel. It's hopeful. You end the novel on a hopeful point, but the reader's really left almost a chapter behind. And I say that in that you force the reader to tie up the ends themselves. And I love that. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your choice, because you could have easily, and I believe in the one version you had finished it a little bit more bluntly. And I just wanted to talk with you about this really fabulous choice that you made to end it how you did.
So I also enjoy stories where there's a little bit of ambiguity at the end, where you could take it one way or another. I also love the discussions that come out of books that end like that, where different people have different opinions about how they think it did or didn't end. There was actually a point right up until the 11th hour that a certain decision had been made. And then Mark and I were having a conversation really like moments before it was going to print. I think it was one of our last conversations. And he had thought something was undecided. And I said, no, I'm pretty sure if you look on the one page, it says blank. And so we looked and he said, what if you change that one sentence that would leave that one more thing undecided? So we changed that one sentence, which it was brilliant. I thought it worked so much better. But I do like that idea that the reader can kind of draw their own conclusions and there's no right answer. And that makes the ending satisfying, I think, in the way that you can choose the most satisfying ending for yourself.
I like it. Okay, I'm going to pause. I know we'll come back to The Good Son, but I did want to get a chance to talk a little bit about how you got into writing. So, I know you went to Waterloo. We were there a few years apart. Could you tell me, though, how you started to get into writing?
I think I've always been interested in writing, and I wrote stories when I was really small. I was already writing lots of stories, and I was always writing as just something fun to do, never believing it was something I could really do. And then at university, I actually wanted to study English, but I had decided that wasn't, I needed something that would get me a job. So I wanted a more practical, which I chose psychology, which wasn't that much more practical unless you're going to get your PhD, but it felt more practical to that 19-year-old version of myself. So I studied psychology and legal studies, and I was writing on the side just sporadically. And it was always a hobby for me. And then I started entering some short story competitions. And it wasn't until you almost need, I think, some external validation from somebody who's not related to you to tell you that what you're writing is actually half decent. So I entered a short story competition and I won first place. And I got to go to a writing conference as part of the prize. And I'd never been to a writing conference. I'd never been around other writers. I'd never met agents. And so I was actually very afraid to go because I didn't think I belonged. I was like, well, this isn't my crowd. I shouldn't really be there. But then Scott encouraged me to go, and I did. And it was it was probably the best thing I ever did, because I was surrounded with people just like me, like people who really wanted to write. And some of them were already successful and some weren't yet. Like they were aspiring writers, which is how I saw myself. And that's actually where I met an editor in line for coffee. And I say I met her, but really I had scoped her out on the program and I knew exactly who she was. And I just happened to be in line for coffee behind her, and I don't even drink coffee. And I started striking up a conversation with her, and we got talking about what kind of books she was looking for, which they had told us they'd put a moratorium on asking her that, but I ignored that. And then she told me what she was looking for. So that night I went back to my dorm room, because she stayed in residence, and I wrote a picture book that was in line with what she was asking for. And then the next day I just happened to sit beside her at lunch. And I was like, hey, so really casually, like, I just wrote this picture book. Is this what you're looking for? And so she told me to send it to her, which gave me a direct in to actually send her a now solicited manuscript, which is like hitting a gold mine, right? It doesn't just go into the slush pile. And then she didn't really want that story. But while we were talking, I had mentioned The Little Boy Who Lived Down the Drain. And she, while taking a bite of her sandwich, said, that sounds interesting. And then just kept eating her sandwich. Later, a different editor took over her job and was corresponding with me about the other manuscript. And I said, well, she'd also expressed interest in this, which wasn't a lie. She said it sounded interesting. So she said, oh, sure, send that. So I did. And that became The Little Boy Who Lived Down the Drain. I think I don't know where your original question was anymore now.
That's the perfect direction. That's the perfect answer. I think what I heard there was a lot of perseverance and good timing, and having to find, you started writing because you loved it, and, you turned it into something that you did based on grit, basically.
And I think like believing in yourself comes when you see other people believe in you. So your family and people close to you always believe in you, and that feels great, but it almost feels like they have to, like even if they don't. So it's really the external validation that for me, it was people who were just at this conference, who were in the profession, who seemed interested and were like, if you won first prize, these were people who didn't know you who picked that. So that's when I think I began to see myself as someone who, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could write and turn it into something.
Now, I have a couple more questions about your writing, but the one that I am really interested in is the jump between children's books, which they're a completely different style. They're super difficult to write for a ton of other reasons. They're really short, they're really concise. That stage to writing an adult novel, where did that come in? When did you decide, you know what, I'm going to write a full manuscript?
I was always writing both. So
okay,
my first novel that Mark referred to, that will now be my second novel, I was working on that. So that was before my daughter Hannah was born, and she's 13 now. I was working on that then. I'd always wanted to write a novel. At the same time, I had the idea for the picture book, The Little Boy Who Lived Down the Drain. So I was working on that, just two completely separate projects. And then at a certain point, the novel became daunting. I'd been working on it for years and years, just piecemeal, like 2 years not working on it. And then I would be on a mat leave, so I would pull it out and work on it a little bit again. And it became such a daunting, large scale project that then I pulled out the picture book, and it seemed much more manageable just in terms of size. I could sit down and go from start to finish, and it didn't take a year to read it from start to finish. So I focused my attention on the picture book in terms of it being manageable, but also I think I had young kids then. And so I was reading tons of picture books, and it felt more like the type of reading I was doing and the audience then that I was working with my own kids. So after the picture book, then I have written another picture book, and I have about 5 more if there are any picture book agents here tonight or publishers. I have lots more picture books as well, and I would love to keep writing those. But then I went back to the novel almost just out of, I'm going to finish this thing. And so I did. And then I had another writing contest that I entered, and Marilyn Simons, who Mark's mentioned as well, was one of the judges. And I got to meet her at the awards banquet. and she did a session on writing. And after that, I connected with her, asking her to be my mentor because she did mentorship programs. And so she agreed to be my mentor, and she worked with me for over a year on my second novel that will be coming out. And that is also when I really believed in myself as a writer and started committing to the actual practice and investing time and money and more energy and treating it like it wasn't just a hobby. So that was a big turning point for me as well.
And that leads nicely into my next question, because I'm in awe of what you do in a day. And one of those things, other than having, a full-time job and a family, you do commit to writing regularly. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, what that practice looks like, and what does your day look like when you're juggling all the different lives of Carolyn?
I I did take a year and a half off of my teaching job. That was planned 7 years ago, and that was partly to travel and then partly to write, to give myself more writing time. But now that I'm back working full time, it's very hard to squeeze in time to write. So I get up just before 5 o'clock most mornings, and that gives me time to make a cup of tea. And by 5 o'clock, then I'm sitting down and I'm writing, and I write for about an hour and a half. And it's the perfect time to write because there's nothing else you should be doing at 5 a.m. Like, if you're not supposed to be doing laundry or the dishes or talking to your family, no one else around you is awake. So it's a really nice time where there's no other expectations or obligations that you feel like you're ignoring to do your writing. So I do my writing then. Then I get ready for work. Sometimes in the morning, I squeeze in a little bit of Duolingo because I'm trying to learn Dutch and French as well right now, which my daughter got me hooked on over the Christmas break. Then I teach all day. Then I come home from teaching and I either finish the Duolingo that I didn't finish in the morning. And then it's just your regular, like making dinner, picking kids up from piano lessons, hanging out with the family. Then Scott and I usually watch a TV show at night. And then I go to bed super early because that's the only way I can get up early. And I usually just read in bed. And that's kind of a day in the life of Carolyn.
I'm tired. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm a little tired. I know I can see a bunch of questions jumping in, and I have two more questions that I would like to ask, and then I am going to start going through some of the Q&A. But, you've talked about everything you do during the day. Did you pick up any hobbies? People are talking about, the pandemic and pandemic hobbies. Did you pick up a hobby over, the shift in life that we've had the last year?
I picked up running a little bit. So I was trying to exercise during the pandemic, and then we were home all day because I was still off on my leave then. And so I was doing a lot more exercising, and then I found the Nike running app. This isn't a commercial for it, but I was never able to run before. And some people who are on here who play soccer with me can attest to that. I used to have to train to run a 3K. And when I mean train, like for months, I had to train before running a 3K race. So then I started running more. And then my goal for 2021 was to run 5K, because before I'd tried a 5K and it was not a good scene. I think I was hallucinating at the end of it. So my goal is to run a 5K, but I've run probably now 4 or 5 5Ks. And so my new goal, which is happening this Saturday, is to run 10K. So I'm running a 10K race on Saturday. So that's the biggest pandemic hobby I think I've picked up, is just running multiple times a week and doing longer and longer runs. And then the Duolingo, I guess, could be like a pandemic hobby, but it started more at Christmas break. But then we were in lockdown. It was sort of a lockdown thing as well.
Do you find that running helps you gather, do you get writing inspiration? Do you work out plot points?
I do.
While you're running?
I do. It's actually a great time when you're blocked or you're stuck on something, to walk away from it. Doing anything will help, but going for a run often will, while I'm running, all of a sudden I'll be like, that's it. That's what I can do. So yeah.
Okay. I've got a few questions coming in. One is, there's a trend of the good titles. So the good doctor, the good wife, the good son. What prompted this title? Where did it come from?
To be perfectly honest, it actually originally came from when it was the two brothers in the story. And I was trying to suggest which one of them was truly the good son. There were you could pick this son or this son. So when we changed the story to a brother and sister, I wasn't sure if the title still worked, but it does, just for different reasons. So I definitely wasn't trying to be trendy with the other good titles, although maybe they were in the back of my mind, who knows. But it was more just that idea of, how do you qualify good? Like, which one of these is the good son? And now it's more, well, I don't want to say it without giving anything away either, but let's go with it. It's trendy and this is going to help it sell. That's not why I chose it. I don't know exactly. I can't remember how I came about with that particular title. I know it had several titles in its evolution.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that your book really asks is what qualifies a good son, or a good child, and how outside and inside lived experiences really differ. Because I think Zoe would argue with you about that very strongly.
Yeah, and she would even argue, if you asked her if she was the good daughter, in some ways, I think very much she wants to be and tries to be the good daughter. And in other ways, she would say she's failed miserably, or the good sister.
Yeah, no, there's a depth of those shades of characters in that book. I have a question from Tracy, and basically she's saying, your book's out in the wild. How nervous? What's it like knowing people who are not, your immediate family or fellow writers are reading your book? It's on bookshelves. Anyone can go buy it.
It's exciting because I think when you're writing, well, for me, there was always this, no one will ever see it. I'm writing it and I was like, we don't have to worry because no one's ever really going to see this. Yeah. But your secret hope is that someone's going to see this or someone's going to read it. So it's so exciting to know that people are actually going to read my book. Like, they're going to read this story. At the same time, it's slightly terrifying as well, to put it out there and just like, what are they going to think? What if they hate it? So it's exhilarating and terrifying. I wouldn't say in equal measures. It's definitely more exhilarating than terrifying, but I'd be lying if I didn't say it was slightly terrifying.
I have someone wanting to know that you bring a notepad on your fishing trips. Okay. Is that a normal thing? Does Scott enjoy that you bring a notepad rather than a fishing pole on fishing trips?
I'm a casual fisherman. I also bring a book and sometimes have a nap. Scott does the fishing and his brother is also like an avid fisherman. I'm just along for the ride and I'm great company in the boat. I don't do a lot of the fishing. I'll catch a fish, but I don't really touch them. The biggest fish I ever caught, I don't even have a picture of me holding it because I couldn't. I can only hold the small ones that you can hold by the mouth.
Sounds like a good fishing answer.
I bring a notepad in the boat.
Good. Okay, we have a ton. This is an awesome audience. Just as a side note, I love all the questions. You guys are making my job very easy, so keep them coming. I have a really great one from Nancy. Besides growing up in a small town, what in your family relationships impacted the direction of your story? And I love this question because I think writers always put facets of themselves and their lived experiences in every character that they write. I know I do.
Yeah, there are probably quite a few scenes that have small touches of my own childhood for sure built in. And if I took a highlighter, I could pick out all of those moments that I've lifted probably right out of my experience. But on a more general scale, what was it? What parts of my childhood have impacted
what about your family relationships have impacted the story?
I think I was focused on things you believe as a child, and you believe them to be so true that you make decisions based on those perceptions, and then how that can change as you move into becoming an adult and your view and your perception changes. So that's one, I think, major theme from my own life that I pulled into the story for sure.
It is interesting, watching Zoe grow up. Something that really hit with me is that you watch her go through those experiences that as an adult, I don't think you really fully understand, of where, your family becomes your friends, and you realize, perhaps your family isn't perfect, but they're real, which is even better. And I think that came across really, really clearly in Zoe's experience. So that's always a good point.
Thank you.
I have someone asking you, you mentioned, or Mark mentioned, one of your students gets a shout out in the acknowledgements. Question is, how have you involved your students in the writing process?
Sometimes in very specific ways. So not in this novel, but the other novel, I was trying to describe the sound of chickens, and I couldn't get it. So I actually played, I made it an activity for my students. I played a soundtrack of chickens squawking over and over, and their job was to describe the sound they heard. And someone in there came up with a description that I actually used in that novel. This one was a student who was sort of disengaged from the academic world, but loved cars and could rebuild a car from scratch, I'm sure. And is probably doing very well right now in some sort of mechanical field, I'm sure. But I tasked him with the research for the car that plays a role in this story. And so he was getting pictures and giving me details and stats. And it was just a way to involve him in learning. And he gave me some good information. So, and I'd always promised him when he was doing the research, I said, if this book ever gets published, I promise I'll mention you in the acknowledgements. So I wanted to hold true to that promise.
What a really interesting way to get, a student that's not engaged back interested in learning skills at the same time.
And he was so proud, every day that he brought in some information, you could just see he was so proud of the research he'd done. So.
Okay, we have a few more questions. One is, and I'm not sure if you're able to say this yet, but I also like to ask this question. Can you talk a little bit about your next novel? I know we're just launching the first one and we're still gonna get to celebrate The Good Son, but any hints on the next novel?
I can say it's similar in themes, that it deals with family relationships and childhood events impacting your future.
If people want to follow along and learn more as information comes out, where can they find information online? Your
My
social
website,
account.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I have a Facebook page. So if you look up Carolyn Huizenga Mills, so my full name, if you can spell Huizenga, you can find me. And I also have a website that would help you keep track too. So it's carolynhuizengamills.ca.
Now, I have a really great question from Donna and a comment. So Donna is saying, first of all, she loves your author photo, by the way, wink, wink. I feel like there's some private comment there.
Donna might be related to the person who took the photo. She might be the mom.
So she's asking, have you had any feedback from anyone that surprised you about this book?
Well, I haven't had tons of feedback yet because not so many people have read it. So I've had a range of feedback. I've had people who absolutely loved it and couldn't put it down. I've had some feedback. There was some disappointment, which I was expecting in my use of language in the book. So that's not a spoiler, but there is some swearing in this book. But I don't think any of it surprised me per se, no.
Amanda is actually asking a question that was on my list and I hadn't got to. What novels did you read growing up that probably affected you most as perhaps a writer?
Oh, what didn't I read growing up? Anything by Ellen Montgomery, I think, is where I really wanted to become a storyteller myself, and specifically the Emily of New Moon series. I always go back to that one because I believe it was reading Emily of New Moon is where it solidified in my heart that I wanted to be a writer as well. So I loved all of her stuff, but I'm a truly indiscriminate reader. I read across all types of genres and any good story. I just love it. So I don't know what other specific books I might have read growing up other than Ella Montgomery. I know definitely like fed my writer soul.
Now, for today's books, what is on your bookshelf, or what is a book that you have read or are reading that you love that people need to know about, other than The Good Son? What are you reading right now?
Well, right now, I love anything by Ann Patchett. I love anything by Kate Morton, is one of my favorite authors. And if she puts something new out, I'm guaranteed to like buy it the second it becomes available. Actually, that's how I first met Kaylee. She was interviewing Kate Morton, which makes her kind of a huge celebrity in my eyes too. I recently just read a book called Necessary Lies by Diane. I don't even know if her name's Chamberlain or Chamberlain. And I loved that. And I loved her style of writing. And I thought, this is the kind of book I want to be writing. So I actually I got 2 more books by her. I don't know if I'm supposed to show other people's books at my book launch. I just got 2 more books by her from the library. So I'm really looking forward to diving into those. What else do I love reading? I honestly, it's just any good book. You throw a good book my way, I will devour it.
Erin is asking a great question about how you're going to continue balancing writing and teaching. Do you aspire to become a full-time novelist, or will this always be something you do in parallel with teaching? Well, I know that's a hard question, right?
In a dream world, I would love to be a full-time novelist. For right now, I would have to keep writing and teaching. But yes, ideally, that would just be incredible to be a full-time novelist. But I've also loved teaching. I don't want to make it sound like I'm anxious to get out of teaching. So for the foreseeable future, definitely parallel tracks. So early mornings, they're in my future.
And talking about the early mornings, what made you decide that 5 a.m. was the time? Like, was there any inspiration for that, or was it just like, this is when I can fit that extra hour in my day, or hour and a half?
It started as just, this is when I can fit it in. I'm not an evening person at all. So after work or in the evening, if there are people who can stay up late and get things done, that doesn't work for me. My brain sort of shuts down around 6 o'clock p.m. So trying to be creative in the evening wasn't really feasible for me. But in the morning, I wake up 100%. Like, as soon as I'm awake, I'm ready to go. So that just felt like a really good time to harness all that creative energy, and none of the weight of the day had built up on you either. You weren't tired from anything. You were well rested from sleeping. But then recently, this didn't really factor in, but maybe reinforced it. I read Karma Brown's The 4% Fix, and it's all about like stealing that extra hour out of your day. And I was already getting up early when I read her book, but I think it solidified that this was a really worthwhile habit to maintain, and the reasons why it was worth still getting up early to keep doing. So that was a great book to help inspire me to continue getting up at 5 a.m.
I have a couple more questions. One of them is, I have Holly saying that you're much appreciated at your school by all of your students, and that you cannot retire for some time. So there we go.
Says Holly, who just retired.
All right, so Holly's got a 1-up on you.
Yes.
I have one question. It's very specific, but can you remember what that short story contest was that you won that kind of sent you to your first writers conference?
It was the Canadian Authors Association Can Write competition. So CAA and then Can Write with an exclamation point. It was the 2014 here.
Can Write with an exclamation mark.
And then they printed a story in an anthology. So that was my first printed
your
story.
First published book.
Yes, my first published story.
We've talked a little bit about writers groups, and I've got a question about, can you talk about the value of a writers group?
Yes, this feels like a loaded question, Kaylee.
You have to say only good things about the wonderful members in your group.
So I'm actually part of two writers groups. So I have a writers group that is BAM, and I think I saw some BAM members that are here, which is really the Burlington writing group. It's the Burlington Author Mafia is what they've been termed by a bookseller, actually. Different Drummer Books gave them that name. And so they were the first writing group that I joined, and it was kind of surreal when I got to join their group, because it is this group of fabulous women who are all quite like prodigious producers of kidlit, really, and middle grade fiction. And I had one little picture book out, and I'm sitting with all of these people. I was starstruck by many of the people. Sylvia McNichol will know, because I was very starstruck by her. My students read her books all the time. And I only got introduced to that group because with my picture book, I went to the Rainforest of Reading in St. Lucia, and it was with some group of authors, which was also my first time being referred to as an author. So that was exhilarating too, when the organizers would say, well, our author's this, and I'm like, oh, they're talking about me. So that was great too. But Lana and Jennifer Muksang and Carrie Lynn Winters were all on that trip with me. So that's one writing group, and that's where I was mostly workshopping my picture books, although later I did start bringing scenes from my novel as well. And that's just an incredible group of women, and it's so motivating to have other people who are in the business give you feedback. And then my other writing group, which I better not leave out, Kaylee is one of the members, and Kate and Robin, who I'm sure are here too. And Margaret, who I think is here, was a member of that group as well. And that's in the Kitchener area. And that group too, even apart from writing, just the friendships that come out of these groups and the support you get, whether it's related to writing or not, is motivating. And it's people who know what you're trying to do, and they get the ups and they get the downs, and they've walked that road themselves. Also, there's a huge accountability piece there. When you have to bring a piece of work because it's your week to present or everyone is sharing, you need to sit down and get your writing done. So that is also helpful. And then just giving other people feedback, being on the other side of it, is helpful too, because you actually learn a lot from critiquing somebody else's work too. So it's like beneficial from every which way.
I think I have time for two more questions. I've got two already lined up. So Carolyn, the question is, I'm going to change it slightly. So the question is, what advice would you give your students who hope to be authors? And I'm going to broaden that to, not just your students, but other people who want to become a published writer. Right. And I think it was Robin who said, you got to sit in the chair and do the thing. You just have to keep doing it and put yourself out there. So for my students specifically, and I do have lots of students who want to be writers, and I encourage them to seek out opportunities to actually get their work out there. So there are so many different competitions or magazines you can submit to. And this is true for students too. There's great Canadian competitions that are free for students to submit to. And if they get selected, their work will appear in an anthology. So, and I've had students who had stories published in, it's not the Polar Express, Polar Expressions. I keep mixing it up with the movie. Polar Expressions is one that students can enter. So I always just encourage them, keep writing, but also keep editing, because a lot of my students in particular think you write this, what you wrote is the first thing you wrote. So they'll look at like my novel or my picture book and think that's just how I sat down and wrote it. That's how it came out. And then they look at their own writing and say, but mine doesn't look like that. And mine doesn't look like that either the first time I write it. So I show them pages of like edits and things crossed out and how messy writing can be. So to allow yourself to like start where you start and then move it to where you want to be. But yeah, my advice is Robin's advice. Sit in the chair, do the thing. There's no shortcuts.
Yeah.
Sylvia's just mentioned in the chat that there's a website called writingtherollercoaster.com, and they're looking for short stories on pandemic experiences, and that's open to all walks of life, including students. So if there's any students listening, that's a great one. Okay, and I have time for one more question, and then I actually have to excuse myself. I somehow have a prior commitment, even from a digital virtual life that we're living right now. But Ed, I love this question because Carolyn has such details in every house she writes. Ed wants to know, what house did you imagine when you described Zoe's childhood home? He mentions a street name, Vienna Drive, or did you imagine it?
So it's a mix. The house itself is probably an amalgamation of different houses and my imagination. So the house itself wasn't a specific house, but the street, even though the story is set in this fictional Dunford, the actual street, every scene that involves the abduction or Zoe on that street as a child was 100% Vienna Drive, where I grew up in Calgary. So it's not even a small town street, but it's not a busy street. And there are some details that you might recognize, my sisters will, who grew up on that street, how it abuts with the ravine. And the ravine plays an important role in the story as well. So yes, that was Vienna Drive, but the house itself was a mishmash of imagination and probably real houses.
Thank you. Carolyn, thank you so much. I think I'm inviting Stephanie to come back if she has any last questions to have with you and let you have some final words. But I just want to say thank you for letting me celebrate the launch of your book. And if you haven't bought The Good Son yet, go buy it. It will also help her move to her dream of writing full time. So
thank you,
bye.
Kaylee.
And on behalf of the bookshelf and of Cormorant Books, I'd like to thank Kaylee and Carolyn for their wonderful chat this evening, and to everyone who joined us tonight. What a great opportunity to explore writing and personal habits and the ways that who we are influence what we do. And I think that's a really wonderful, interesting sentiment that everyone can get something from, which is lovely. Now, there are a few more questions. Are you up for a few more?
Sure, yeah. I love answering questions.
Okay, all right, great. So the one I was wondering if you wanted to talk about, someone wanted to know if you have a preference for where you write. Do you like to write on a notepad? Do you grab a laptop? Do you have like a kind of environment that works best for you?
For the environment, I think I do most of my writing in the office that I'm in right now. So I'm usually curled up. There's a big chair to my left that I'm often curled up in that chair under a blanket writing early in the morning with my cup of tea. When I'm doing more of the editing phase, I sit at the desk and then I have paper spread out and post-it notes, and then I'm more business-like. But I really will write anywhere. I tend to follow sunbeams around my house. So I often move to where there's a sunbeam and I'll sit there to write, whether that's at the dining room table or on the couch in the living room. And as for the notepad versus computer, I do a lot of thinking on the notepads, but when I'm actually writing the chapters or writing the story itself, I do that on my laptop.
Nice. It's always interesting to see what everybody's process is, whether you've got a dedicated location or some people just kind of, as you're running or whatever, put things together. And
yeah. Or in a boat.
Or in a boat, of course, right? Never never discount the value of a good boat for taking up the time, right? So once again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. There's been so much great response, lots of interest, and also for supporting us by including the bookshelf in your promotion. And if there is anyone that's looking to pick up the book, certainly there's copies in store, and we have more to come. So if you don't see us right away out there with books available for you, there are going to be more to come. Carolyn has been kind enough to come into more on afternoon to sign in the store if you want to come in and say hi. We do have some limitations, so you might have to run around the block. We don't know whether what kind of fan response we're going to get, but she'd be happy to probably see you and sign. She's going to be signing copies in store, and there's already been plenty of requests for signings and personalized messages. So please don't forget to support your indies. If you can't come to Bookshelf, seek someone out and try to support them, because we're really happy to support Canadian talent. So yeah, thanks so much, and everyone else have a good evening.
Yes, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you Stephanie too for partnering with us. So yeah, I just want to thank everyone who joined us to help celebrate my launch. It's such an exciting night. And I know Kaylee's not here, but I wanted to throw a special thank you to her for interviewing me, and to the Bookshelf for partnering. And Cormorant, you made my dreams of becoming a novelist come true. So thank you to everyone at Cormorant as well.